Let's bring in Troy Bramston, senior writer and columnist with The Australian. Troy, the Prime Minister well ahead as preferred PM as well. I've just noticed a poll out of New Zealand by Newshub Reid Research, and Jacinda Ardern has 59.5% lead. Simon Bridges in New Zealand, 4.5%. 4.5% support as preferred PM. So that should make Anthony Albanese feel a bit better, but I guess incumbents generally are doing better around the world, aren't they?
Yeah, I think that's pretty much right, Kieran, although in some countries such as the United States with Donald Trump and also in the UK with Boris Johnson, they haven't had the lift in support that a number of other countries have and their leaders. So there's no doubt that Scott Morrison is top of the pack globally in terms of the public response to coronavirus, in terms of the health response and also in the economic response. So the government will see this as an endorsement of their leadership and of their policies. Today they should be very pleased with these figures, and the news poll also did show that the voters are generally very happy with the government's response to this crisis. And some sobering figures there for the Labor Party, because it is 1 year since the election and the Labor primary vote is now seemingly stuck in the sort of mid-30s range, which is barely 1 in 3 voters opting for Labor. And the Prime Minister has quite a strong leadership edge over Anthony Albanese as preferred PM, and also in terms of his individual popularity.
And as you say, the government quite rightly getting that support at the state level as well, with the national cabinet working effectively. But we're seeing again some tensions between the states and the federal government in relation to, well, particularly the Queensland and WA on tourism and reopening those states to that industry.
Yeah, so I think we're now over the hump, so to speak. The infection level is down low. The death rate is obviously very low, thankfully. And so we're now coming on the other side of this pandemic. And I think voters are starting to get a little bit anxious about when we're going to get back to normal. And we know about those disastrous economic impact figures that the longer we remain essentially with these restrictions and businesses in lockdown and people not returning to work, the economic effects are significant. So whilst I understand a number of the premiers are wanting to be cautious, and the Prime Minister has been cautious throughout this crisis, I think voters are going to have their patience tested by states that are not coming back into line with the other states. So essentially Queensland and Western Australia with their borders still shut, and also with Victoria delaying that return to work, and cafes and restaurants and other businesses reopening. I can understand they're cautious about it, but I think a lot of voters are going to be looking at what's happening in the other states and wondering, why aren't we getting back to normal as fast as we can?
And it's, precarious for, well, let's look at Palaszczuk, Anastasia Palaszczuk, for example, the Queensland Premier. The timing of, say, opening up in September, when there's an election due the month after, it could be all too late for some in the industry.
Yeah, it could be. And whilst there's been good ratings overall for the state leaders and for the Prime Minister, these are not fixed in stone. They're not permanent. They are a snapshot in time as to how voters think these matters are being handled right now. But they could change very quickly. We've seen political figures rise in the polls and fall in the polls very rapidly. So it's kind of a balancing act, Kieran. I think the states need to not be so fixed in their views longer term, but be prepared to readjust them, on a daily or weekly basis. And I think that voters will give them some latitude in managing the response, but they don't want to be too far behind the other states that are getting kids back to school, getting people back to workplaces and reopening businesses.
Yeah, it's this cost benefit, isn't it? It has been the whole time, the balance between the health cost versus the economic cost. And when you've got such small numbers, even despite the Queensland WA Premier saying the eastern states have got more transmission, but still the numbers are very small. Nationwide, 9 new cases, and the active rate continues to fall. We're now in the mid-500s in terms of the number of active cases nationwide. So there would be many in industry who's saying, and with now without jobs, who would be looking at the government saying, well, come on, you've given enough on that health focus, you've got the capacity in place, let's give a bit to the economic focus, otherwise some of these industries will be a shell when they seek to reopen.
I think that's right, Kieran, and I think there is a mood that I sense, and it's only a mood, it's only my judgment, that that voters are prepared to take a few more risks. We seem to have come through the worst of this pandemic in terms of the health impacts, but now that we've learnt more about it and we're cleverer and we're smarter in managing those health impacts, whether it's just washing your hands regularly, using hand sanitizer, social distancing, wiping down surfaces, I would think that a lot of voters would be thinking, look, we could manage these risks much better than we could a few weeks ago or a few months ago. So maybe we should be moving a little bit faster to reopen the economy. And that would be a risk worth taking rather than losing your job or seeing a business go belly up. So you're right, it is this balancing act between the health and the economic impacts. But I think that the mood in the country now is let's just try and get the economy back up to full speed as fast as we can, and let's manage the risks in doing so.